Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome back to the second edition of the European Humanitarian Forum. Thank you very much for joining us here in Brussels as well as online. Should you want to contribute to Twitter, please use hashtag EHF2023. Spanish, English and French interpretation is available. You're also very much welcome to intervene in French and Spanish. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ali El Jabri. I'm a senior moderator and studio presenter with Pro Moderation. I'm a former TV correspondent for Associated Press and a war reporter for Dutch language newspapers Trouw and De Standaard. I'm also a former lecturer of international relations and international political economy at The Hague University. I'm very happy to be with you today and I look forward to learning from your contributions. We will start this excellent panel, whom I'm about to introduce to you shortly, with a video message by Mr. Mong Suwaidullah, who is a Rohingya youth activist residing in Bangladesh and highly familiar with the realities on the ground. Let's play the video now.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm a Rohingya student and a board member of Rohingya Student Network, RSN. I'm currently in the Cox's Bazar refugee camp in Bangladesh. And it's an honor to speak to you today through this recorded video. Firstly, I would like to thank the European Commission and the Swedish government for organizing this important event and for allowing me to share the message of Rohingya people with you. I would also like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to me today. As a Rohingya, I have experienced the unimaginable horrors of forced displacement, torture, rape, and extrajudicial killing. For more than 5 years, my people have been living in refugee camp in Bangladesh with limited access to basic necessities. We are a people without a home, without a future, and without hope. The situations for the Rohingya people still remains there, and we need your help. We are grateful for the efforts of the European Commission and the European Union to address the plight of Rohingya people, including providing humanitarian aid, expressing concerns about the human rights situations, and imposing targeted sanctions to the responsible in Myanmar. However, we need more than just aid and sanctions. We want our home. We want to return to our home. We need justice and accountability for the atrocities that have been committed against our people. We appreciate that the EU has been the biggest donor to the Rohingya response, providing huge amount of funding for the Rohingya people since 2012. We also know that EU has been advocating for a political solutions for the Rohingya people and supporting the world courts and investigations into crime against the Rohingya. But we feel that the effort of EU are not enough. The EU must engage directly with the Rohingya representatives and community-based organizations from Cox's Bazar. The EU must prioritize our participations in all consultations and decision-making process regarding our futures. The EU must support our community-led initiatives, CBU, community-based organizations that empower our people and promote our self-sufficiency. The EU must understand that without engaging with us directly, EU may not fully understand the needs and perspective of Rohingya, which limits the effectiveness of the efforts. We need more than just aid and sympathy. We need a long-term solution that allows us to return to our home and live there in safety and dignity. My dear attendees of this event, I asked you to stand with us in solidarity and support us in our struggle for justice and dignity. Together, we can end the suffering of the Rohingya people and build a brighter future for us all. Thank you. Thank you so much.
He may not, yes, an applause is in order. Thank you. Mong Suwaidullah. I'd like to invite the members of the panel to please take their seats on the stage. Allow me to introduce the speakers to you. Sitting immediately next to me is Mr. Knut Durman, head of the ICRC's delegation to the EU, NATO, and Belgium. Next to him sits Ms. Ilse Brandt-Keris, UN Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights. In the middle is sitting Mr. Eamon Gilmore. He is EU Special Representative for Human Rights. Next to him is sitting Mr. Piet Haerbout, who is the Director General for Legal Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belgium. We're very happy he's here today to replace Ms. Hadja El Habib, the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs, who couldn't make it due to other important obligations. Last but not least is Ms. Kim Seilinger, who is Special Advisor on Sexual Violence and Conflict to the International Criminal Court prosecutor. May I ask for a warm applause welcoming the speakers. The setup of our conversation is rather simple. I'll start with a question for each member of the panel. Hereafter, I will open the floor for your interventions. Your questions and your comments are highly welcomed, since we realize that there's a lot of knowledge in the room and not just on the stage. And I'm very grateful that the 5 speakers agreed to limiting their statements to 5 minutes at most, and I thank them in advance for their patience with my, at times, strict time management, which is only in the interest of maximizing the space for interaction and keeping things dynamic. Let me start with my first question for you, Mr. Gilmore. Welcome and thanks. My apologies, Mr. Gilmore. Thanks and welcome, and thanks for joining us. How does the EU ensure that international humanitarian law is at the heart of its external action? Please also touch on how you work on accountability for the most serious of crimes.
Well, first of all, let me comment on the very moving video we've had from Mong, and to say that I agree with what he has said. Support for the Rohingya people is about more than aid and sanctions and sympathy. And indeed, it is very much about accountability, which is why the European Union has been driving the independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar at the Human Rights Council. And it is also why the projects we have are engaging with community-based organizations on the ground. I visited Cox's Bazar very early in my term as Special Representative for Human Rights, and I am planning on returning there again very soon and having the kind of direct engagement that Mong encouraged us to have with him. Let me just identify 6 areas briefly where the European Union is working on IHL. First of all, formally, we have the European Union guidelines on international humanitarian law, which is the way in which we operationalize our work. We produce regular reports on the implementation of those guidelines. The 6th such report will be appearing shortly. We have included IHL in the EU's action plan on human rights and democracy, and it's also, of course, part of the mandates that I have as Special Representative. Secondly, we include IHL in the work that we do on human rights bilaterally with countries. That includes particular discussions where there are conflict situations, but also encouraging the countries to ratify the Rome Statute where they have not yet done so. Thirdly, we support the implementation of IHL through the multilateral and regional fora, the UN Security Council, the Human Rights Council, the General Assembly, but also with regional organizations such as the African Union, ASEAN, the OAS, and of course the Council of Europe. We support the inclusion of strong references to key IHL in key human rights initiatives, including the appointment of special procedures. Good example is, is the Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan, with whom I work very closely, and of course we support partner organizations such as the ICRC. We have been providing political, diplomatic and financial support to the International Criminal Court, and also to special courts, for example, Sierra Leone, the Extraordinary Chambers in Cambodia, Special Tribunal for the Lebanon, as part of our global fight against impunity. We stood by the ICC during the years when it was having difficulties, when it was under pressure, and where it was suffering from a lot of disinformation. And I think because we did so, we are now in a situation where the ICC is able to lead on Ukraine. And I think we saw a very clear example of that with the unprecedented decision last week to issue an arrest warrant for President Putin. The fifth area that I want to mention is the capacity building with partner countries and, of course, supporting our own member states. The work particularly we're doing in Ukraine through Europol and Eurojust. And we're also developing a human rights and IHL due diligence policy for security sector report for third-party security forces and actors. And the final point is the issue of data collection and integrity. Currently setting up an impunity observatory, which was initially floated by the European Parliament, and we're also working on delivering on the commitment which was made at the forum last year to establish an independent overview of IHL violations to support humanitarian policy making and advocacy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gilmore, and thanks for keeping your statement concise. You may applaud. We have 30 seconds for that. Thanks again, Madam Keris. Thanks a lot for joining us. How do you see the role and recent experience of UN-mandated investigative bodies on IHL and human rights in armed conflict? And how does the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights support monitoring in this context?
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. It's a very important continuation of a discussion we started last year, so very glad to be here for the second forum and with this distinguished panel in particular. Accountability and really securing pathways towards accountability is one of the core focus areas of the High Commissioner and all of our office. We know that here we have the evolution of a number of investigative mechanisms over time. There are more and more of them, one may say, and more different ones, but certainly they have always had a very important accountability role. And I'm here, of course, talking about the ones under the UN. They bring credible information. You're talking about the monitoring function. It is, of course, using rigorous methodology to make sure that there is a reliability in the credible information, but the analysis as well to the entire international community, so that the facts are recorded and that the analysis also, in line with the applicable international legal frameworks, can play into the various accountability mechanisms that there are. OHCHR as an office currently supports 13 mechanisms as the supporting secretariat. 7 of them are explicitly mandated to investigate both violations of international human rights law as well as international humanitarian law. We also stress always, as we all do, I think, in this room, the rights of victims, and victims being at the center of all these efforts, so that it's critical for the right to, but also for the quest for justice for victims. And again, as I said, these mechanisms take many different kinds of forms. And criminal accountability, of course, is key, but we also are talking more broadly about accountability in the context of these types of mechanisms. So we had the, let's say, stagnation around the possible ICC referral of the situation in Syria as an example I wanted to bring here. And since then, there has been an interest in really expanding the accountability role of international mechanisms and the various types of new ones that we have then seen established both by the Human Rights Council as well as by the UN General Assembly. And they are essential. They compile evidence and case files that can be requested, that can be used by prosecutors, judicial authorities from competent courts. Of course, we all know, certainly in this room, I think, about the differences in the thresholds in having a human rights investigation in the field versus what you need as evidence for criminal investigations, but nevertheless, the usefulness of that coherence in our cooperation. The IIIM in Syria, the mechanism had up until the end of 2022 cooperated with 192 distinct investigations and prosecutions in 15 different competent jurisdictions, and that includes EU member states, Germany, Hungary, Sweden, France, the Netherlands. We also have IIM in Myanmar, by the end of last year, had shared 67 evidential and analytical packages with various judicial authorities, including also for the proceedings at ICC and ICJ. So that's a very strong signal in itself. I have 1 minute and 12 seconds. I'll quickly move on, because I wanted to stress also the importance that apart from that particular process, we must remember that that really is part of the preparatory work, the work of these mechanisms. So it's enhancing the chances of holding perpetrators for serious human rights violations accountable in general, but states obviously continue to bear the primary responsibility for prevention of violations, both human rights and humanitarian law, but also in addressing them. And I would stress here the need as well for third states to use the influence over the parties and, again, both to ensure respect with international law, but also through the activities we recently see a lot more of, which includes the activating ICC and exercising, of course, also universal jurisdiction. So, but we need resources to go with that. It's not enough to adopt resolutions. We need also the political will to really make sure that those mechanisms become effective and can play into this. So, just on time, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Kiris. My next question is for Mr. Piet Harabout. What is the place of international humanitarian law in Belgian foreign policy? And could you share with us some of the concrete and practical measures that you take to promote compliance with IHL?
Yes, thank you very much, first of all, to have Belgium on this panel, and I would like to bring the greetings from Minister Labib, who unfortunately could not be here today as she's attending the Foreign Affairs Council at this very moment. On your question, as Minister Labib said in the Parliament when she started her mandate, there's no doubt that the compliance with IHL is more relevant than ever today. It will continue, therefore, to be a Belgian priority in our foreign policy. We saw it last year once again in Bucha, other places in Ukraine, but also in Syria, Yemen, Democratic Republic of Congo. We just heard also the video testimony from a victim, Rohingya victim of the atrocities in Myanmar. Civilians have to be protected by all means. This is very much a central tenet of our adherence to IHL. We also have to increase the knowledge and understanding of IHL. The work of the ICRC is indeed crucial here. And I would like to refer to the existence since 2017 of the platform IHL in Action, Respect for the Law on the Battlefield, which is created by the ICRC and is a collection of real case studies documenting compliance with international humanitarian law in modern warfare. Also, I would like to underscore the role of IHL in the protection of civilians. We need to improve our humanitarian diplomacy in addressing IHL violations. When intervening in a country, we should go beyond providing assistance by also ensuring that protection is guaranteed on the ground. Now, of course, we cannot do this in a situation of isolation, and that's why Belgium supports the international actors. First and foremost, ICRC, whose mission it is to promote respect for international humanitarian law, and its implementation in national law. And we need to ensure that states respect IHL and basic humanitarian principles. Belgium is also contributing significantly to the budgets of other organizations that make important contributions, like the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the International Criminal Court, of course, that was mentioned already, and the UN team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict. I would like to just give you some more concrete examples about Belgian activities in the field of IHL. Together with the Democratic Republic of Congo and the European Commission, ECHO, we co-organized an event, a side event, during the 77th ONGA, the General Assembly. And it was one on the accountability for sexual violence, which is, of course, an issue that is very serious and also close to the heart of our minister. We think that these events, and like the one of today, can create the synergies that we need to make progress. We also very much support the International Criminal Court, in other international criminal tribunals, and accountability mechanisms like the ones that have been mentioned here before, like IIIM and others. We try to also play an active role in on the national level through support for the compliance with international humanitarian law. We have the Belgian Committee for International Humanitarian Law, la Commission interministérielle de droit humanitaire, that exists since already 1987, one of the oldest ones. They advise, they also try to disseminate information about the compliance with international humanitarian law, and they also help the government to take action there. I see that I'm going past the time limit, but maybe I can come back some of these points later. Thank you.
Dankjewel, Mr. Harbouth. Madam Seelinger, you have been spending time in Ukraine recently investigating sexual violence with local actors. Can you share with us on that experience, and also more generally what the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC is doing to address sexual violence in Ukraine and beyond?
Thank you. Is this on? Okay, great. I have not, let me qualify this, I am not actively conducting the investigations in Ukraine. That is the role of investigators in the Office of the Prosecutor. However, I've been working with the Ukrainian investigators and prosecutors to work to strengthen their approach within their national system as a method of a complementarity, but also as a way of expanding the relationship between their typical traditional work and now what is their burden of using ICL really to address the crimes committed on their territory. So I'm happy to speak about that. And I wanted to note that you know, the International Criminal Court, we're doing our best, but ultimately our jurisdiction, what we'll be able to do is limited in a way. And we have this arrest warrant that you mentioned, Mr. Gilmore, which is quite striking against the President Putin and also his Minister of Children's Affairs. But it is very much, I just wanted to say this at the outset, that we need many avenues to justice here. And I wanted to commend Belgium in particular for really invigorating universal jurisdiction in the last decade, really. With the pursuit of Hissène Habré, which ultimately landed in the courts of Senegal, but also more recently with many of the cases coming out of Liberia, for example. So I just wanted to just acknowledge that with some humility in the beginning. We play a role here, but there are many regional actors and national actors that are all going to have to come to fill out the picture of accountability for conflict-related sexual violence, for sure. With respect to Ukraine, it's true. So I've been spending some time with the investigators and prosecutors there, and it is very clear, right, that we have great concern about sexual and gender-based crimes committed in the context of this current conflict, but even that have gone back to the violence in Crimea in 2014. We have survivors of conflict-related sexual violence who have been seeking justice for a decade now. And so their voices are now being added to some of the more recent survivors' voices, and we need to think of this holistically in terms of supporting the national actors who have been trying to document these crimes for quite a while, the service providers in Ukraine and in the humanitarian sphere who have been providing care for survivors in different periods of time. With respect to the investigations that are happening right now, since this full-scale invasion since last February, it's been quite interesting because the Office of the Prosecutor General has created a very sophisticated war crimes division, and within that division there is a specific unit focused on conflict-related sexual violence. Now, it includes 8 prosecutors, which sounds very small, but they're quite a powerful and serious team, and their role is to support the regional prosecutors throughout the country who are building their cases. Currently, it seems that the approach is very individual. They are looking at individual victims and survivors who can name a perpetrator, right? So this is a very bilateral traditional approach to sex crimes investigations and prosecution. And so what we're trying to do right now is help look at this in a collective way, an aggregate way, so we can more fully capture the atrocity crime nature, war crimes, crimes against humanity, look at this as mass crimes in a way, so that we can not put the burden of proof on individual survivors, for example, right? But what can we do to triangulate information and show the broader picture of what's happening? This will allow us to look at mid-level and higher-level perpetrators also, and not just the direct perpetrator, the soldier who was there, the group that was there. So this is part of the challenge. The other issue I think we're seeing in Ukraine right now is the limited legal framework. Currently in the criminal code, there is one provision, Article 438, which focuses on violations of the laws of war. And it's written very generally, so it doesn't specify sexual crimes in it, but the way it's written, these can be addressed through that provision. However, it's limited in terms of the modes of liability it provides for, direct perpetration or command and ordering, not all of the other forms of responsibility that are important in these cases, aiding and abetting, the other things that might make someone responsible or show their linkage. So these are some things. This is a question for law reform within Ukraine to broaden the scope of what can be prosecuted. And then I think really just in the 19 seconds I have left, one of the challenges is the issue of disclosure. And I don't mean disclosure in a legal sense, I mean in a human sense, the revelation of something that's happened to you. And I think right now the Ukrainian authorities are well aware from reports that many crimes of sexual violence have been happening, but there is a delay right now. Survivors are not yet ready to come forward. And I think we have to respect that and balance the need for accountability with the time it takes for people to get what they need before approaching the legal system. I'm happy to talk about that if you're interested, but I would name that as a natural development, but also it might delay some cases for now. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Salinger. We look forward to hearing more from you and the others during interaction. After I ask my last but not least of questions to Mr. Durman, head of the ICRC's delegation to the EU, NATO, and Belgium, what are some of the concrete challenges that the ICRC experiences in regards to compliance with IHL, and what are some of the recent developments surrounding what you try to do to promote compliance?
Well, thanks a lot for having me here. It's really a great pleasure, and as you also said, it's great to have this continuum of discussion. I think to start with, the most important thing for us is that respect for international humanitarian law is seen as a political priority. And here I want to echo very much what also HRVB Borrell said this morning. We have to double down on IHL and respect for the humanitarian principles. This is certainly music in our ears. The other point also from this morning when our president spoke about with the Geneva Conventions, we have a powerful consensus. I think that's extremely important. We have the Geneva Conventions that have been adopted some 75 years ago. They are universally ratified, and this is something that needs to be cherished. They apply really independent of the motives to go to war. They contain, and thanks again, Ilse, for having mentioned this. They contain an obligation to respect and to ensure respect. So a very strong role also politically for states to work also and to influence the behavior of parties. So that's, I think, is very, very important. Talking about the importance of fundamental principles or humanitarian principles, in particular in times where we are at now, where quite a lot is politicized, we see a polarization. I think impartial humanitarian action, such as done by the ICSC, is of utmost importance, because we have to reach, and this has to be defended, we have to reach really people across front lines and also in hard to access parts of a country. Only if we manage this, then we can really, then we don't leave anyone behind, as it has been said this morning as well by Commissioner Lenarčič. Accountability, all the speakers before have said it before, very important as well, but we have to acknowledge that accountability in most cases comes after the act, so after the violations have been committed, and that's why I think it's important to impress on you as well that prevention is of utmost importance, and that's in fact something I think where the ICSC over the last hundreds of years have, or 160 years if you wish, has gained a particular expertise, and we are working very closely there together with states in order to achieve it. So the first part among the many activities that we have is really to try to assist states in passing domestic legislation, because only if you have the relevant domestic legislation, this IHL becomes then really a norm also for the application of armed forces and also the civilian population. And in this context, perhaps also very important, because we spoke about sexual violence, the ICSC is regularly providing guidelines and developing guidelines, for instance, with regard to the prohibition of sexual violence. We have established or provided guidelines for the domestic implementation of these prohibitions so that states know to do really what to do domestically. The second part of preventive action that we see is really to influence military doctrine and then also training to foster really an environment for respect for international humanitarian law. If we talk about influencing doctrine, for us it is very much operationalizing international humanitarian law. So when you look, for instance, at the most recently adopted declaration on the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, we have established recommendations how to do it in practice. Only like this you manage then to influence and create overall then an environment that is conducive for respect for IHL. When it comes to training, it's important, certainly the quality, how it's being done, but you should also look at how to socialize then respect for international humanitarian law. There perhaps the studies that we did at ICSC level on roots of restraint and are a very important dimension to achieve just that. Finally, work for a better understanding of international humanitarian law is equally important for us. And this in particular when you look at the new challenges that are coming. So when you look at the use of cyber warfare, when you look at autonomous weapons, AI in military operations, from our perspective it's important to have discussions. If these technologies are being introduced, are they introduced in a way that they can comply with international humanitarian law, and to assess whether you have to pass via clarification of the law or possibly to develop new rules to capture this. So these are really things that we see as priorities. We can also then mention that this has been highlighted, the important role that national IHL committees have. So to have an all-government approach to IHL and to prevention of IHL violations and a better understanding, that's very much at the center. So to conclude, for me, it's important, and with this I want to impress on you, violations of international humanitarian law are not a necessary byproduct of armed conflicts. Afterwards, ensure respect is an important domain, and the EU as well, through its influence, can play an important role to influence parties to an armed conflict, even without being party to the conflict themselves. And then finally, really make also prevention a political priority. Thank you.
Thank you very much for ending on that very positive and optimistic note that despite the horrors of war, maybe we can still have armed conflict, however horrible, while not violating IHL. Time to interact and hear from you. including if you are online. Can we please see the information for Slido on the screen, including for those following us online? If you wish to contribute your questions, then you can scan the QR code or visit slide.do and enter the event code, which is hashtag EHF2023, and then select Aquarium March 20, which is this room. However, if you are in the room, please refrain from using Slido and raise your hand. That certainly makes things more interesting and dynamic, but at all times, try to keep your intervention short so we have enough time for back and forth. Let's see. Madam, let's start with you. Please wait until you have the microphone.
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion. My name is Tessa Terpstra. I'm with Save the Children Netherlands. And I have a question about child-focused accountability. As we know, in the world today, 1 in 6 children live in areas with armed conflict. And I was wondering what's happening in your respective fields in terms of child-focused accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's have another intervention from the floor. The gentleman over there.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is José Luis Barreiro. I am the coordinator of the Colombia Humanitarian NGO Forum. A question for the panel is, as international humanitarian law is applicable not only in a humanitarian context, but also for those working for peace, how to make those crimes against the international humanitarian law not to be lost while the peace conversation, and I'm thinking in the specific case of Colombia, where armed actors are negotiating with the government, but at the same time they are breaking the international humanitarian law and they are asking for adapted to the Colombian situation international humanitarian law, lowering the standards. How do you see this and this challenge?
Indeed, how to maintain accountability even when there are peace negotiations. Let's perhaps start with that question and have a response from the floor. Yes, sir.
Well, I've had the privilege, in addition to being the European Union Special Representative for Human Rights, to have been the European Union Special Envoy for the peace process in Colombia since 2015. And I have followed the peace agreement since the latter stages of its negotiation in Havana, right through to its implementation. I would first of all commend the transitional justice system that has been established by the peace agreement in Colombia, which went through some very difficult days, but which is now functioning. Would remind people that it has found the collective leadership of FARC to have been guilty of crimes against humanity. It is a transitional justice system that now has a large number of state actors participating in it. And it is also a transitional justice system that is supported by the International Criminal Court, to the point that the International Criminal Court signed a memorandum of understanding with the government of Colombia to underscore that if the transitional justice system does fall short, as you have said, that the International Criminal Court can come back in again as a court of last resort and exercise its complementary functions. And finally, I just would express the hope that the negotiations that are now commencing with other armed actors in Colombia will eventually bring about a total end to violence in that country.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive response. Madam, could you perhaps respond to the question on children?
Well, I actually wanted to tag on to
By all means.
Iman's answer in particular, in also saying that I think here it really is impunity, as we know, is rampant. So that's that. I mean, in conflict situations and very often after conflict situations, we have so many of the conflicts we deal with today are cyclical and have been going on for a long time. So it's certainly at the core of our question of accountability. And it just exactly along the lines of what Iman said, I think there it is important for us to remember that yes, criminal accountability is essential, is critical, but we also need to deal with the structures that that protect the impunity. So really dismantling those structures overall. And of course, in that we come into the whole series of the parts of transitional justice that need to be in place, which also I think our Belgian colleague mentioned and are so important for that. For the children, I think that it's all I can answer, but I think there are others who may have better answers, particularly considering the recent case with Ukraine and the focus of the prosecutors' initial case. I think that all we can say is that it's very clear that we do need to remember to have that particular focus. Obviously, an all too often forgotten one. So not to forget the children, the most vulnerable in any situation of conflict, but certainly in our eyes in pursuing accountability, that would be essential as well.
A session is dedicated tomorrow, especially to that topic of children in armed conflict, which I'm privileged to moderate as well. But let's hear more from you, Madam, on this topic.
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in on this and complete a thought or add to it with respect to the question about children. So it's quite true. Our very first case and conviction at the International Criminal Court was very much focused on the situation regarding child soldiers, right? And so we have traditionally looked at children, perhaps through this initial very narrow lens of children who are participating somehow in hostilities because of the atrocities they're made to commit, but also the atrocities they're made to suffer as forcible recruits. So I think this is the initial lens with which we have approached children at the International Criminal Court level. But as we've mentioned now, the first set of charges we see out of the Ukraine situation is about the illegal transfer and deportation of children, Ukrainian children, into the Russian Federation. And so this is another piece of the lens or piece of the work on children. I would mention also there has been, of course, in other situations and cases, we're looking at charges of forced marriage, forced pregnancy, which includes violations. When we say children, this is a wide range. Like the crimes, the way they affect a 2-year-old is very different than the way they affect a 15 or 16-year-old. These are all technically children, and yet we have to disaggregate them, as my colleague, Special Advisor Véronique Aubert, who is with Save the Children, of course, is anxious to remind us. So we do have a special advisor on crimes against and affecting children, as you know. Together with Véronique Aubert, I will be undertaking policy review this year. I will be in charge of revising the 2014 policy paper on sexual and gender-based crimes. She will simultaneously review and update our policy paper on crimes affecting children and involving children. So hopefully by the end of the year, by the Assembly of States Parties this December, you will also have a new set of tools out of the ICC on crimes against children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the room with us is Mr. E. Peterson. Where are you located? E. Peterson, the Deputy Executive Director of the UN Population Fund. Not with us currently, no problem. Ms. Gloria Gaggioli. There you are, Director at Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. Could we have a microphone here? And may I kindly ask you to limit your statements to 2 minutes at most? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for this panel, which was fascinating. So I would like to raise one challenge that we often hear about in relation to accountability, which is the challenge of double standards, because obviously it's not possible to prosecute everyone responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts of genocide. So this issue of double standards, we see it also when we talk about monitoring of IHL violations more broadly. And last year at this very forum, we discussed a lot about this issue of monitoring rather than just accountability, because we see that a number of conflicts are being scrutinized. We have commissions of inquiry, the media is interested in them, etc. But we have also forgotten conflicts, which is very problematic because there we don't even have the data on IHL violations. We cannot even analyze them. So it's the position of the Geneva Academy that we need to have a more global approach to the monitoring of IHL violations. And we believe that a very simple tool of a global annual report on IHL violations would actually help to make sure that we can really ensure respect for IHL, but for all the victims of armed conflicts and on both sides. And I think this is something we owe to victims of armed conflicts, and that accountability is extremely important. but that at the same time, we need to have a global approach to the monitoring of IHL violations.
Who do you think which actor should take responsibility for such a report?
I mean, we are there. So we are an academic institution that is specialized on international humanitarian law. So we are able to provide an independent, neutral analysis of IHL violations.
Excellent.
But obviously, no one can do something like that alone. So it relies on partnerships. But things can be done.
It will have to be indeed a community
Thank you.
effort. Thank you very much. Let's take some comments from this side of the room, please. Maybe raise your hand if you wish to speak. Let's start with the gentleman here and then go to the hand that's right in the middle. Yes. Your brief comment.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm Olivier Longuet from Action Against Hunger, Action contre la faim. Thank you very much for bringing the opportunity. And you have been highlighting the situation on the violation international humanitarian law. And I'd like to recall that last year, in 2022, 1,800 incidents took place, killing or kidnapping or wounding more than 300 aid workers. And it's true that as a humanitarian organization and sector, we are actually, we need the support of the member states, the EU, especially because we have tools. We were mentioning the mechanism. I think we have two resolutions, the 2286 and the 2175. We have the French and German call for humanitarian action. So we need to see a better engagement on two accounts. The first one is engaging at the highest diplomatic level for the protection of health and humanitarian workers. And two, using diplomacy to prevent detrimental measure against access, criminalizing humanitarian action with a measure on counter-terrorism or which are actually impairing our activity. So my question, I mean, I guess it's a triple question. The first one is last year, the Commissioner Lenarcic mentioned the creation of a mechanism for monitoring the violation on humanitarian and aid workers, and we would like to know where we are with the mechanism. And then to the Mr. Gilmore, maybe a more specific question, maybe on the mechanism with which we could find a better way to fight against impunity. Then I'm joining my colleagues on the impunity. We have the feeling that really very few perpetrators have been indicted or pointed at. Okay. And we feel that this is a strong signal that should be sent to those attacking humanitarian workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Let's have maybe a response from the room first and then move to you, madam, because there were many questions indeed. Maybe starting with the first two questions. Who would like to respond to that?
I'm not sure I have the order of questions, but just to respond, maybe a couple of them. I think yes, indeed, we had a very good panel last year on the need for having global data and how to ensure this, and so that clearly, I think it goes to the question that we also had here on the various mechanisms that collect information and the fact, and that there is a need to make sure that there's coherence and complementarity in the information that is collected. And also going back, I think, to the question we discussed last year of ensuring that the methodology also is used in a way that is rigorous and that we have an agreed methodology, so we don't just have a mosaic of different parts of it. The rest, maybe I have more things to say, but I think you are urging me on, so I will leave it to my colleagues on the panel to
Thanks a lot for your patience with my time management. Mr. Durman.
Perhaps I want to take up one of the points that you made. You made reference to counterterrorism measures that are being undertaken, and I think this is a very important point. When we look at the protection of humanitarian workers or humanitarian action in general, I think and we see and this has been proven that there are incidental negative impacts of counterterrorism and sanctions measures. And the recognition that is getting now stronger and stronger that they are there is already the first step. And now, in particular, when you look at sanctions regimes with the resolution 2664 by the UN Security Council, which has now accepted a humanitarian carve-out applicable to all sanctions regimes, is simply a necessary and important development that we have. We see the US as well with general licenses, and I think now it's also up to the EU to follow this example. This will do great benefits really to the humanitarian actors. We simply face the point, in particular when it comes also to counterterrorism, that the definitions of material support to terrorism are so wide that certain activities by humanitarian actors, if not carved out, would be covered, and this is very important from our side as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for keeping it brief. Mr. Gilmore.
Okay, well, let me start with the IHL monitoring mechanism that Commissioner Lenarčič spoke about at last year's forum. The European Commission did issue a call during the course of last year for proposals for an enhanced response capacity humanitarian plan. Arising from that call, no agreement was signed, so the Commission has relaunched a call more for the establishment of a network that would act as a first step and produce a yearly report on IHL. The deadline for that call is the end of April, so hopefully arising from that, we will see some progress on that. On the situation of humanitarian workers and their protection, this is a priority for the European Union. We speak publicly about it all the time. We have also integrated it into the mainstream work we're doing. If you take, for example, Ethiopia, where we have consistently called about humanitarian access and safety for humanitarian workers, together with the need for the peace process, together with the need for accountability, linking all of these together. I think the third issue you raised, which is the issue of impunity, I'd love to give a comprehensive answer to that, and perhaps it might arise in a later question in the discussion, and I'd be happy to address it then.
30 seconds, I promise. First, it's really nice to see you in person, Professor Gaglioli. Thank you for your article in 2014 on how conflict-related sexual violence is a violation of both IHL and international human rights law. But just a note on conflict-related sexual violence, in terms of more robust monitoring, another project that I was involved in last year, it was the UN framework on the prevention of conflict-related sexual violence released by the SRSG Pramila Paten's office. And in there, one of the many levels of prevention that we addressed was the need to coordinate monitoring responses and efforts. So I think maybe that might be a resource in terms of enhanced monitoring for conflict-related sexual violence, early indicators and performance together. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. I can only see a pink arm. That's all I can see. Let me just stand up. Yes, you, madam. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm an international lawyer. I would like to ask the panel regarding this situation of the ICC arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. So Russia is not a member state of the ICC Rome Statute, and therefore its rulings are not binding in non-member states. So I would like to ask, even with the International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine stating that Russia has committed war crimes, this is not an ad hoc tribunal decision, so it's not as binding as the UN ICC and only an advisory opinion. I would like to ask the panel in specific, what kind of signal are we sending by these two international legal actions, and how can the international community of states and organizations deter Russia and other authoritarian regimes from breaching the international legal order? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I saw a hand go up. Yes, madam, go for it.
Thank you very much to the panel as well. My name is Anne-Sophie Lenkom. I'm one of the thematic experts of DG ECHO, based in the Asia-Pacific region. Few questions, sorry. I'll be quick.
Maybe limit them to two at most.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, the first one follows on from what the other person here a little bit asked about, which is, yes, I'm not saying accountability is not important, and it certainly is for us as a community, for the victims, but does it really deter future violations, in your opinion? So does it have this deterrence effect? Is it, or should it be, bigger part of humanitarian actors' work, or would that risk endangering even more? Okay, I stop there. I had one more, but I stopped.
Thank you for your generosity in giving time to someone else. Let me just take a question from Slido, since they are also participating, that is people online. ICRC is developing tools/guidance that results in informal, indirect ways of advancing/developing IHL and accountability. But, and the but is capitalized, might give the message that we do not need new rules. ... Thank you for that question. I'll turn to the stage and allow you to pick the question you want to respond on. Mr. Durman.
Well, probably I take the last one. And it's great to connect with Professor Maruda again. I would say no, that's not the message that we are passing when we insist very much on preserving the acquis and what has been negotiated and which is universally accepted. That's, I think it's important to defend this basic minimum that is there, but on the other hand side, there may be new developments that require new laws. And in fact, the ICRC is on record, and most recently with regard to autonomous weapon systems, where we have clearly called for a new legal framework that needs to be adopted by calling for a provision of unpredictable autonomous weapon systems, and then also autonomous weapon system with an anti-personal use, and the rest should be regulated by restrictions. I think this is something that happens continuously, and the ICRC also in the past has been pushing it when it came to weapons issues like cluster munitions and others. So I think we need to play it really as appropriate by the norms that are there. Would you allow me as well to say something about humanitarian workers contributing to...
if it's short, yes.
Very short. For the ICRC, we support very much and have supported the development of the ICC statute and also the elements of war crimes, but we would not contribute to any judicial processes because it would endanger our personnel on the ground and would be against our principles of impartiality and neutrality. And therefore we have gotten as well from tribunals an exemption from testimony. Thanks.
Excellent. Mr. Herbout.
No, thank you. I'll try to answer to some of the questions that have been presented to the panel. On the last one that you read from the screen, I think developing new rules is always part, I think, of the effort to fight impunity and advance accountability. And for instance, you have some, at this point in time, some efforts, for instance, in the UN. There's the file crimes against humanity. I mean, it is very important that there is progress there on new rules. I also want to touch upon the importance of complementarity, because I also saw something on the screen on universal jurisdiction and the link to international criminal justice. Complementarity is very much at the core of how in Belgium we see the question of accountability, also the role of the national jurisdictions and the International Criminal Court. I think it's very important that we also develop the tools to work together at the national level between the states. And that's why I would like to just, if you allow me, make a small pitch for a conference that will take place in May of this year on the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, which is something that Belgium, along with Slovenia, the Netherlands, Mongolia, Argentina, is organizing in order to basically facilitate the cooperation between the prosecutors and the criminal justice systems in the states. So I think we need to work on all these different levels in order to advance the cause that we are all very close to. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, so 2 more statements, then we return to the room.
Just quickly, just to address the question about jurisdiction. In the case of Ukraine for the ICC, this came as a result of a referral of 43 state parties and Ukraine by 2 different ad hoc declarations availing itself of the jurisdiction of the court. So I don't think that we have a jurisdictional problem overtaking this situation. But forgive me if I misunderstood the first question. In terms of the relationship between humanitarian actors and accountability actors, this is a gap and it is a tension, of course, as you've mentioned. And I do think that in some cases, it would be helpful to have a conversation about what would actually be useful for accountability purposes. Often we're not asking for individual client or patient's names or individual case level data. Sometimes it's very helpful just to have an aggregate showing of over what time period and what geographies have certain types of violence been happening. That can be very helpful as just lead evidence that doesn't actually, it's up to an individual organization to determine whether that challenge poses conflicts for your mandate, but for some it might not, and that might be just a potential area of collaboration or assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and also for keeping it brief. Yes, Mr. Gilmore.
Well, just to address the issue of the message about the arrest warrant of Putin, and also the point that was made about does accountability prevent? I think we're seeing a turning point. I think we're coming out of the era of impunity. I think we're entering a new age of accountability. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think the momentum for accountability in Ukraine has been unprecedented. We're seeing the growth of the use of universal jurisdiction. We're seeing an increase in transitional justice systems. We're seeing a massive transformation in the technology, which now makes it harder to hide war crimes. And I think we're entering an era when the perpetrators of IHL violations will never be able to feel free walking through an airport or going about their business, even long after they have left office or they have left the command of a particular military operation.
Thank you very much. Returning to the room, let me stand up so I can have better visibility. Yes, let's start with the gentleman here and then move to the lady over there.
Thank you. I would like to speak in French. Je suis membre de l'organisation.
Un moment, monsieur, to put on the headphones. So I said we have interpretation for French and Spanish. I hope you have your headphone. Please put it on if you do.
It's okay. Perfect. Je suis membre de l'organisation des étudiants congolais en Belgique. Je voudrais aborder la situation sécuritaire au Congo. Le pays est victime depuis de nombreuses années d'une agression étrangère, des milices qui sévissent au pays. C'est une des graves crises humanitaires au monde depuis de longues années. Et très récemment, le M23, un groupe rebelle soutenu par le Rwanda, entre autres, y perpètre de massacres et des exactions, des violences sexuelles au sein du pays. Je voulais savoir quelles sont les mesures que l'Union européenne prend en ce qui concerne la République démocratique du Congo pour d'abord sanctionner les responsables de ces crimes, comme on le fait à juste titre contre la Russie et tant d'autres pays agresseurs. Également, je voulais savoir aussi comment est-ce que l'Union européenne apporte le soutien vis-à-vis de populations qui sont déplacées. On compte plus de 500 000 déplacés des guerres et des personnes qui sont sans abri aujourd'hui. Donc c'est une situation très préoccupante. J'aimerais savoir également la Belgique et l'Union européenne dans son ensemble, comment est-ce qu'elle compte assister la population congolaise qui souffre depuis de nombreuses années, et aussi comment est-ce qu'elle apporte des sanctions contre les responsables qui sont connus, entre autres avec les rapports mapping et très récemment avec l'inclusion de milices M23 soutenues par le Rwanda. Merci.
Thank you very much. Just in case you did not get a headphone at the entrance, let me quickly summarize in the context of the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, what is the EU doing to sanction those who are responsible for the grave violations that are happening there for a very long time? And what is the EU and Belgium in particular doing to support those who are displaced as a result of the conflict? And I think the number was 500,000 people that are displaced. Thank you very much, sir, for that excellent question. Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Larissa. I'm master student at Institute for European Studies at ULB. This panel is more focused on international issue and international humanitarian law. I will maybe bring focus on the national level and each national state in European Union, especially because I am here in Belgium, and I would have a question from the sir from the Belgian. Sorry, I didn't catch the name. I'm referring for the migrant issue and crisis that was happening here in Belgium on Petit Chateau, and that was just resolved maybe 2 weeks ago. People were sleeping here like whole winter outside without proper condition and everything. Now it's partly resolved, that question. So I'm just referring about that issue that's happening not only in Belgium, but all around Europe, let's say Fortress Europe, and also prosecuting the people who are helping this migrant. So I just wanted to raise this question. Thank you very much.
Just noting that Mr. Harbout represents the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but maybe he could still touch on this issue, which is in the end a human matter. And as well as the question on the DRC. Who would like to start?
Yeah, as you pointed out, I work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so I'm not directly involved in the internal management of this crisis, which is a European-wide crisis and of course a global crisis. I think that Belgium is doing its part in receiving the applications from the asylum seekers that come to Belgium. But it's a European issue that is a lot broader and that is, is discussed at different council meetings and levels. There is a lot of effort being done. I could not, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, make any special comments on what you said here. I can assure you that there's no prosecution of people who try to help. This being said, there was also a question, il y avait une question sur la situation, bien sûr, à l'est du Congo, qui est très... I'm sorry, I'll switch to French because the
By all means, go ahead. Yeah.
Was also addressed in French, and I want to, of course, use this language with pleasure. Donc, cette situation est vraiment très préoccupante et la Belgique en est pleinement consciente. Comme vous le savez, sans doute, la ministre des Affaires étrangères de la Belgique a été présente donc, dans votre pays. La Belgique met toujours cette situation à l'agenda européen et c'est discuté à plusieurs niveaux. En ce qui concerne les besoins humanitaires, la Belgique contribue de par l'action humanitaire bilatérale, mais aussi de par le soutien à d'autres organisations qui aident sur place. Et donc, mon pays continuera à suivre la situation de près et pour bien sûr aider les gens qui sont touchés par ce conflit dans l'est de votre pays. Thank you.
In case your French is as rusty as mine and you forgot this fantastic device, the response was Belgium is very concerned with the situation in the Congo as well as the EU. and it's contributing to humanitarian assistance, among others, in bilateral agreements, but also directly assisting organizations on the ground, and we will continue to follow the situation closely. Thank you, Mr. Harbout. Yes, sir.
The European Union is giving a very high priority to the situation in Nigeria. We recently had an election observation mission in Nigeria. We're giving particular attention to the activities of the militia that you have referred to and to the violence that is taking place there. It's regularly discussed at meetings of the Foreign Affairs Council. You asked 3 specific questions. One of them I will get you a specific answer for. That's on the support that is being provided for IDPs. I don't have the actual detail here in my notes, but I will get it for you. You can give me your details after the end of the meeting, and I'll arrange to get you some detailed information, detailed response to that question. In relation to what we are doing about sanctions, I can't give you a detailed answer to that because the sanctions, decisions on sanctions are taken by the member states under a process which is established for that purpose, and I'm not in a position to give you detailed information about who's being considered in that listing. And the final part of your question, which was about making the sanctions work. The European Union recently appointed a dedicated official, senior retired official, who will have responsibility for addressing the implementation of sanctions and ensuring that the sanctions that are applied by the European Union are effective.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive response. I apologize to those who wanted to raise a question or make a comment and did not get a chance because of the time. Time is finite, unfortunately. I do want to thank our speakers for their contribution, Mr. Harbout, Mr. Gilmore, Madam Keris, Madam Seilinger, and Mr. Durman. Please give them an applause. Please, that's my final statement. Please remember to visit the mosaic wall as well as the exhibition. Wishing you a fantastic day. Thank you very much.